On April 22, 1915, the sun slowly set over the plains of Flanders. The spring air was fresh and deceptively calm, filled with the sense of awakening earth, which for a moment drowned out the stench emanating from the trench line. Along a 6-kilometer stretch of the front, held by French colonial troops and Canadian divisions, a strange, almost unnatural silence reigned. Soldiers, accustomed to the constant roar of artillery and the whistle of bullets, peered warily towards the German positions. There, beyond no man's land, there was no usual preparation for a bayonet charge, no clanking of bolts or commands from officers. Instead, precisely at 1700 hours, signal flares rose above the German trenches, tearing the evening sky with bright flashes. At that very moment, observers noticed something their minds refused to explain. From the earth, as if exhaled by hell itself, a wall of thick, yellowish-green fog began to rise. This cloud was not like smoke from fires or gunpowder fumes. It was heavy, dense, and alive. Driven by a light northeast breeze, this ominous phenomenon began to crawl slowly but inexorably towards the Allied trenches, enveloping shell craters, clinging to barbed wire, and filling every hollow. Along with the approaching fog came a smell, a sharp, sweetish aroma, reminiscent of a mixture of pineapple and bleach, a smell that instantly caused a tickle in the throat and tears in the eyes. Soldiers, who had never seen anything like it before, watched the approach of the green wall with curiosity and anxiety, unaware that they were looking into the face of a new era, an era where air would cease to be a source of life and turn into a weapon of mass destruction. At the moment the cloud touched the parapet of the first trench, the old world, living by the rules of chivalry and 19th-century conventions, finally faded into the past, giving way to the cold, industrial calculation of total war. To understand how humanity approached this fateful line, it is necessary to look at the situation that developed by the spring of 1915. The war, which everyone had hoped to end by Christmas, dragged on and turned into a nightmarish positional stalemate. After the mobile phase of the first months, armies dug into the ground. From the Swiss border to the North Sea stretched a continuous line of fortifications, a scar that dissected the face of Europe. This was the famous Western Front, a place where any attempt at a breakthrough resulted in colossal losses with negligible results. Generals on both sides sought a way to break through these defenses, to find that very key that would turn the static confrontation back into a war of movement. The Ypres salient, a small section of Belgian territory jutting into German positions around the medieval city of Ypres, was one of the hottest points on this line. For the British Army, holding Ypres was a matter of honor and strategic necessity, as it covered the path to the Channel ports, through which supplies flowed. For the German command, this salient was a bone in the throat that had to be removed at all costs. The German Empire, caught in the vice of a two-front war and experiencing a growing deficit of resources due to the naval blockade, desperately needed a quick solution. Traditional means, artillery and infantry, no longer provided a decisive advantage. Machine guns equalized the odds of the defenders against any numerical superiority of the attackers. It was at this moment of crisis and hopelessness that the military turned their gaze to science. Leading chemists of the time, people whose discoveries in peacetime contributed to the prosperity of agriculture and medicine, were now working on creating the ideal tool for eliminating the enemy. The idea was to make the very atmosphere uninhabitable for enemy soldiers, to smoke them out of their deep holes like pests, and to open the way for a victorious infantry march. However, behind this strategic calculation lay a profound moral rift. The use of poisons in war was explicitly forbidden by the Hague Conventions, which all great powers had signed. But the logic of total confrontation dictated its harsh laws. When the survival of a nation is at stake, old agreements lose their power. The German command decided to take this step, justifying it by the necessity of saving the lives of its soldiers and accelerating the end of the conflict. Thus, science, intended to serve progress, became the handmaiden of destruction. Under the cover of night, thousands of metal cylinders were delivered to the front line. They were buried in the ground, camouflaged with moss and sandbags, connected with lead pipes. The soldiers engaged in this work called them disinfection, bitterly ironic about the essence of what was happening. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait for a favorable wind. And then, this wind blew. When the green cloud of chlorine covered the French positions, the effect surpassed the wildest and most terrifying expectations of the attack's organizers. Chlorine, a heavy gas, seeped into the bottom of trenches and dugouts where people were sheltering. The panic that gripped the troops was absolute. This was not fear of a visible enemy that could be fought with a bayonet or a bullet. This was primitive terror in the face of an invisible force that deprived one of the ability to breathe. People threw down their weapons, tore off their ammunition, and ran, trying to outrun the wind. But the cloud was ubiquitous. Those who fell did not get up again. Officers tried to restore order, but their commands drowned in chaos and coughing. Within an hour, a breach several kilometers wide had formed in the Allied defenses. The path to Ypres was practically open. However, the paradox of the situation was that the Germans themselves did not expect such stunning success. They did not have enough reserves ready to immediately enter the breach and consolidate the victory. The infantry advancing behind the gas cloud also feared being affected by their own weapon. They proceeded cautiously, wearing cotton gauze masks, peering into the fog. This hesitation gave the Allies precious time. Canadian units were thrown into the breach. These soldiers, many of whom were volunteers and had not yet smelled the gunpowder of a real big war, accomplished the impossible. They took up positions directly in the path of the poisonous cloud. Chemists among them quickly realized that chlorine dissolves in water, and in particular, in an alkaline environment. The order was passed down the line. Use their own urine to moisten handkerchiefs and rags and breathe through them. It was a desperate, primitive, but effective solution. Through burning eyes and tearing pain in their lungs, the Canadians held their ground, firing at the gray figures appearing from the fog. They closed the breach with their bodies, preventing the front from collapsing completely. The events at Ypres became a turning point not only in military tactics, but also in the psychological perception of war. The internal conflict of each participant in these events reached its maximum tension. For the common soldier, war transformed from a heroic epic into an industrial process of disposing of manpower. The concept of personal valor, as it had existed for centuries, disappeared. It didn't matter how brave, strong, or skilled in combat you were, you couldn't defeat a chemical formula. The feeling of helplessness became a constant companion for the fighters. Every strange smell, every change in the color of the sky caused panic attacks. People lived in constant anticipation of an invisible threat. This internal fracture affected not only soldiers in the trenches, but also those who made decisions. The scientists who created this weapon faced a monstrous dilemma. The most striking example is Fritz Haber, a brilliant chemist whose name is forever associated with the first use of gas. He sincerely believed that his invention would save Germany, that a short and brutal war was more humane than a long and exhausting slaughter. But this logic broke against the reality of suffering. His wife, Clara Immerwahr, herself a talented chemist, could not accept that the science to which she had dedicated her life was being used for barbarism. Her tragic death shortly after the first gas attack became a symbol of the deepest schism that ran through the hearts of Europe's intellectual elite. Science lost its innocence. Progress ceased to be synonymous with good. But the consequences of the gas attack at Ypres extended far beyond the Western Front. Technology, once out of the bottle, instantly spread throughout the world. Polish lands, divided between empires, became the arena for equally, if not more, terrible experiments. Soldiers of Polish origin, mobilized into the Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian armies, found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades, but facing the same threat. For them, the tragedy was compounded by the fact that chemical shells destroyed their native towns and villages, poisoned the rivers and fields where their families lived. The gas war on the Eastern Front, in particular the famous defense of Auschwitz fortress, showed an even higher degree of human resilience. Where it seemed nothing alive could survive, people rose in a counterattack, showing the world an example of transcendent courage bordering on madness. Russia, faced with a new threat, was forced to mobilize its science and industry in the shortest possible time to create protective equipment. And it was the Russian chemist Nikolai Zelinsky who created the prototype of the modern charcoal gas mask, which saved millions of lives. Spain, maintaining neutrality in this global conflict, closely watched what was happening. Spanish military attachés and journalists analyzed reports from the fields of Flanders, trying to comprehend the future of wars. They saw that the conflict had ceased to be a matter of armies and had become a matter of nations and technologies. It was the neutral Spanish press, unconstrained by military censorship, that first began to openly write about the scale of the tragedy and about a new disease that mowed down soldiers, no less than bullets and gas. The flu, later named Spanish flu, although its roots lay in the unsanitary conditions of overcrowded trenches and camps. For Spain, the experience of Ypres became a lesson in how fragile peace is and how quickly civilization can descend into the abyss of barbarism. Meanwhile, the Battle of Ypres did not end in the spring of 1915. This cursed patch of land continued to attract death. The war evolved. In response to gas masks appeared, first primitive gauze bandages, then complex rubber masks with filters, giving soldiers the appearance of creatures from another planet. The face of war changed visually. Now it was a confrontation of faceless figures in mud and fog. But the means of destruction did not stand still either. Following chlorine came phosgene and mustard gas. Ypresite, named after the city of Ypres, where it was first used in July 1917. Ypresite was even more insidious. It did not always have an odor, did not act immediately, but caused terrible burns to the skin and mucous membranes, penetrating even through clothing. The land around Ypres was so saturated with poison that even shell craters filled with water posed a deadly danger. The culmination of this madness was the Third Battle of Ypres, better known as the Battle of Passchendaele, which unfolded in 1917. Here, not just armies clashed, but elements. Unceasing rains turned the battlefield into a boundless sea of liquid mud. The drainage system, created over centuries by Flemish farmers, was completely destroyed by artillery. The water did not recede. It stood in craters, trenches, and lowlands. Tanks, another novelty of that war, designed to break through the front, drowned in this quagmire. Guns sank into the ground under their own weight. People drowned in the mud, the wounded choked, unable to lift their heads. It was the apotheosis of a war of attrition. The British command, striving to break through the front, threw division after division into battle. Progress was measured not in kilometers, but in yards. Every captured pillbox, every destroyed farmstead cost thousands of lives. The landscape no longer resembled Earth. It was a lunar surface, riddled with craters, strewn with debris of equipment and trunks of shattered trees that protruded from the ground like accusing fingers. In this mud, the bodies of Britons, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, French, and Germans mingled. National differences were erased in the face of a common fate. Here, in the hell of Passchendaele, the idea that war could be won with one decisive blow finally collapsed. Victory became a question of whose resources, human, economic, moral, would run out later. It was at this moment, when it seemed that hope had finally abandoned humanity, that an invisible but important shift occurred. The realization of the monstrosity of what was happening led to a change in the very attitude towards the value of human life. Medicine made a giant leap forward. In field hospitals, doctors learned to cope with massive injuries, burns, and shock. Plastic surgery was born, designed to restore the human appearance to those whose faces had been disfigured by shrapnel and fire. The triage system, the sorting of the wounded, allowed saving those who would have been doomed before. In this chaos of destruction, sprouts of a new type of humanism grew, a humanism of action, aimed at saving a specific person, contrary to the general logic of mass annihilation. The memory of Ypres and its battles lives today not only in history textbooks, but also in the very fabric of European culture. The fields of Flanders, once plowed by shells, are now covered with grass again. But every year farmers' plows bring to the surface the __0_ unexploded shells, shrapnel, uniform buttons. And every May these fields are covered with a carpet of red poppies. This flower became a powerful symbol of remembrance, born right here near Ypres, thanks to the poem by Canadian military doctor John McCrae. Red petals on thin stems, grown on disturbed burial ground, remind us of the fragility of life and of shed blood. This symbol united nations. In Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, a poppy on a lapel is a sign of mourning and a promise to remember. Museums located in Ypres itself and its surroundings preserve material evidence of that era, but they do not glorify war or demonstrate the triumph of the victors. In their exhibitions, the emphasis is shifted to personal tragedy. Here you can see punctured helmets, letters that never reached their addressees, children's toys found in the ruins, and, of course, gas masks. These rubber masks with empty eye sockets, which became a symbol of dehumanization. The In Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres uses modern technologies to immerse visitors in the atmosphere of those years, not to frighten, but to allow them to feel the cold and hopelessness experienced by the soldiers. It is a place of pilgrimage for the descendants of those who remained to lie in this land, be they English, German, Polish, or Senegalese. The most important lesson of Ypres for the modern world is the understanding that technological progress without ethical control poses a deadly threat. Gas, flamethrowers, aerial bombardments, all this was born in the crucible of the First World War as an attempt to solve tactical problems, but led to a strategic dead end and a moral catastrophe. Today, as we stand on the threshold of new technological revolutions, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, autonomous weapons, the echo of Ypres sounds as a warning. It reminds us that efficiency cannot be the sole criterion, that behind the numbers of losses and tactical maps, there are always living people. Every evening, precisely at 20 o'clock, movement through the Menin Gate in Ypres ceases. This monumental arch bears the names of 54,000 soldiers of the British Commonwealth whose bodies were never found. Local firefighters step into the middle of the road and play the bugle call _0_. This tradition has been strictly observed since 1928, interrupted only during the German occupation in World War II. The sound of the bugle, clear and mournful, echoes over the city, reflecting off the walls of restored houses. In this melody, history and modernity, sorrow and hope, merge into one. In these moments, as the city's noise subsides, we return once more to that distant spring evening of April 22nd. We see the same sky, feel the same wind, but now this wind does not carry poisonous mist. It carries memory. Memory of how humanity gazed into the abyss and at what cost it managed to climb out. Ypres ceased to be merely a dot on a map or a chapter in a tactics textbook. It became an eternal reminder that peace is not a given, but the result of a constant, agonizing choice between hatred and humanity. And as long as the bugle sounds at the Menin Gate, as long as red poppies bloom in the fields, we have a chance not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The history of Ypres is not a tale of the victory of some over others. It is a tale of the defeat of the human spirit, which, paradoxically, became the foundation for its revival and the realization of the value of each individual life.